Welcome to Second Take, the show that takes a look at the issues behind the news. The International Trade Commission of South Africa has initiated a major tariff review for inputs used in solar, wind and battery storage facilities. Terence Creamer joins me to discuss the possible implications. Hi Terence. What is the background to this review of the renewables value chains?
Well, over many years, South Africa has been seeing this as an opportunity for industrialization. As we put in more and more solar, wind and battery storage, there's an opportunity to produce locally a lot of these components potentially, especially if we scale up and have consistent demand. And then as part of that process, there's been a lot of stakeholder consultation over a couple of years around the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. That has also been knocking around, and eventually this year it was approved by Cabinet. So I think that's really the trigger, is that Itac has looked at the serum, which has a sort of a view of how we can industrialize the value chains around wind, solar and battery storage, and said, you know, what do we need to do as from a trade policy perspective to align the trade policy with the serum. So I think that's really what's triggered this review, and we now have a period where it's out for public consultation.
What actions is Itac contemplating?
Well, the big actions would be to raise tariffs to the WTI bound rate. So most of these inputs these are 82 tariff codes. So it's basically everything that goes into a wind farm, into a solar farm, and into a battery storage facility. So we're looking at solar panels, we're looking at the inputs into those solar panels, we're looking all the way down to the nuts and bolts, the frames, the structures that hold these together. So it's really a very broad-ranging review. And if we were to use tariff policy all the way up to the bound rate, because a lot of this is now either coming through duty-free or there's a rebate on it, it would be a massive uplift in the amount of duties payable. And that has major implications for cost competitiveness of solar and wind versus everything else. So it's a major decision to take that, as well as getting rid of some of the rebates that are in the system, particularly around solar panels. That's a big decision as well, because most of the world is not producing, especially the main parts of the panel. That really gets assembled. The panel itself gets produced in China. That's where the sort of center of production is. So it would also be a major decision. And then there's the issue of the critical minerals and trying to beneficiate some of those that go particularly into the battery storage value chain. And the discussion there is whether we get rid of tariffs on those critical minerals to improve the competitiveness of local beneficiation, or put in export controls, which was also a major decision. We've seen in the steel value chain where you have export controls put in, what they can do to certain prices, for instance in the scrap, and the distortions that have come around the scrap market. So there's no decisions. This is a review. It's been put out for public comment. There's been a 4-week comment period, but it's a very broad-ranging, could have major implications for the solar, wind and battery industries.
This is happening in the context of broader reconsideration of trade and industrial policy.
Yeah, geopolitically there's cover for this sort of thing. We see the actions that have been taken out of the US in particular around tariff policy, very aggressive, very broad-based, and that is underpinned by a desire to reshore manufacturing. Whether that will happen, I think, is a big question. And so we have this political cover that so many countries are looking at using protection again. So protection's back in vogue, trade policy's back in vogue, and so is industrial strategy and industrial policy. So South Africa is using the space that's been created there. But as I said, the trigger here has probably been serum, or the renewable master plan. But we have this sort of industrial policy, trade policy space that's opened up, and we're doing a much bigger review of the steel and stainless steel value chain that's underway in parallel. So this is big stuff that's underway in the whole trade policy space, and it has major implications. In the steel value chain, it really has big implications for industries that use steel and stainless steel. In the renewable space, this is more nascent, and we're wanting to find our niche. And that's what CERAM is all about, having stable demand, which we haven't had. We've had up and down, stop-start demand is the sort of basic ingredient. But if we can say we're going to start investing at a consistent pace and at a scale that sort of can justify more local content, then we need to look at where are our niches that we should be playing in. If this were to be a broad brush raising of tariffs across the value chain, it's going to be deleterious. There's going to be pain. And I don't think that's the objective here, but there's a danger of that. The document is very broad-based, but I think it's more about saying, where can we play across these 82 tariff codes? Where could we maybe use tariff policy cleverly to try and help a nascent industry develop? And I think it's all about being clever here and not, shooting yourself in the foot. We can see the flip-flopping that's happening in the US. You can really hurt yourself, you can hurt your consumer, and you cannot really get what you want from that process. So we're in this place where there's the window of opportunity to do industrial and trade policy is there again, but South Africa has to navigate this very cleverly, or it can really definitely hurt its consumer and its taxpayer. The consumer will pay more. The taxpayer, if we have to incentivize it, will have to pay more, and we know there's no fiscal envelope for that. But you could also not get the results, that you're really looking for. So it's all about navigating this, being clever about what tariffs you employ, what rebates you employ, and there is a signal here that there's going to be a disaggregated approach. So where there maybe is potential for localization, provide some limited tariff protection. Where there's none, rather just open it up and even have rebates in the system. But there's a risk here when you start fiddling that you can make big mistakes.
Where is this likely to land?
Well, I think there are going to be some tariffs that are put in certain sectors. The issue is how broad-based, how high, how long. And there's definitely a view that we can be more muscular in this space. And I think there's a view that, the green economy is somewhere if we have secure demand. And that's a big if. We really haven't had secure demand and consistent demand. But we are getting to the point where we need to make decisions around some of the coal-fired power stations that keep getting these exemptions to operate. And we need to replace them with something. That something, in the South African context, the cheapest renew generation is wind and solar. Has to be backed up with flexible generation, batteries being a big part of that, potentially gas to power, for instance, and also using the coal fleet more flexibly. So we are in that space where demand could rise, but it hasn't. At the moment, we are in a very inconsistent place. So I think that's the first trick. Can we show consistent demand through the integrated resource plan that we're going to be procuring at a fairly large scale this? Once you have that security of demand, then I think we can look at industrial and tariff policy around that so that we can become a leader in the manufacture of certain of these components and inputs into those projects for the South African program primarily initially, but there's this whole opportunity that is going to open up, especially in Africa and elsewhere in the world, as other countries, scale up their renewable generation over time. So it is an opportunity, but one that we have to treat with some caution.
Thank you. That's the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time for more news analysis. Also, don't forget to listen to the audio version of our Engineering News Daily email newsletter.